This is an honor. Secretary Robert Gates here on TCM. Secretary Gates, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
Secretary Gates is here to talk about the movie that comes in at number 24 on the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time, Steven Spielberg's Lincoln. We're going to get to Lincoln, Secretary Gates, but I want to let everybody know the significant role you've played in U.S. history. 8 presidents you've worked for.
Correct.
Joined the CIA out of grad school, is that right?
Yes.
And you've been part of the National Security Council, you were director of the CIA, and then, of course, you were Secretary of Defense under 2 presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama. So when did you start working for the federal government?
1966.
What drew you to service?
Well, in grad school, I actually had my major and my master's was Russian and East European history. I was in the Russian and East European History Institute at Indiana University, and I actually, when I got my master's, I had 2 job offers. One was to join CIA, and the other was to teach 7th grade history in Virginia. And it was a close call.
Was it really a close call?
But I figured I'd do the CIA bit for a while, and then I'd go teach. But I also felt, it was really the height of the Cold War, and I felt a certain obligation to do my bit to help out.
I'm given to understand when an emissary, make it sound very cloak and dagger, when an emissary from TCM approached you about doing this for us, the first movie out of your mouth was, I'd like to do Lincoln.
When we think of Lincoln, we think of the Lincoln Memorial. Mm-hmm. We think of that august statue and this secular saint of American life. And the great thing about that movie is that it shows Lincoln as a real life politician, but without diminishing him. It doesn't dim his aura at all, even as he's wheeling and dealing to get the 13th Amendment prohibiting slavery in the United States passed.
Yeah, there's a sense in America among Americans who are certainly, disappointed, disgusted, aggrieved with the political process, that politics is a dirty word, but it is, since before the ratification of the Constitution, it is how every significant movement forward in this country has been achieved.
Look, the only way a democracy survives and the only way it moves forward is through compromise. And the way you get to compromises is wheeling and dealing, is doing deals. I'll give you this, you give me that. We both walk away thinking we've gotten something, and we've gotten more than we gave away. And Lincoln, in the beginning of 1864, begins to worry that the Emancipation Proclamation, which had come into effect in January of 1863, would actually be overturned by the courts after the war, because it was a war powers measure. It had been taken in the context of war, and that it would be overturned by the courts, and everything would be reversed.
And so millions
and millions of slaves would go back into former slaves would go back into slavery. It also, the Emancipation Proclamation also didn't apply to slaves in the border states who had remained loyal to the Union. So they weren't covered, they weren't freed at all.
This was just the Emancipation Proclamation freed only the slaves in
areas controlled by the Confederates. So Lincoln determined that there had to be an amendment to the Constitution that would eliminate slavery throughout the United States forever.
Abolishing slavery by constitutional provision settles the fate for all coming time.
And then here's where you get into the politics, where Lincoln played the politics. He decided to wait until after the election of November 1864, which he anticipated winning and his Republican Party anticipated winning. They needed anywhere from 13 to 20 votes. It depends on what you read. The movie says 20. He figured a lot of Democrats would lose in November, and during the lame duck session of the Congress, he could turn those votes. A little bit later, after Stevens delivers a speech on the floor of the House, limiting his defense of the 13th Amendment, and sets aside his much more ambitious agenda for the treatment of former slaves, Stevens, Tommy Lee Jones, essentially makes the point that Daniel Day-Lewis, as Lincoln had made to him. First, the 13th Amendment, free the slaves forever, banish slavery forever, then we can turn to these other things. So he's doing the deal with Lincoln but he has to deal with his own radicals who accuse him of abandoning his principles. But he understands, he's been persuaded, I guess, by Lincoln that you've got to get the amendment before you can even dream of these other things.
On that note, let's watch the film. We'll
Sounds
talk more
good.
afterwards. Here it is, from 2012, directed by Steven Spielberg, script by Tony Kushner, Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln. Back with Secretary Robert Gates, who picked Lincoln, the number 24 film on the New Republic's list of the 100 most significant political films of all time. It's a real clear reminder of where we were, and we can revere the man who made the right decision here, but, you know, they were still enormously short-sighted in a number of ways.
Well, absolutely. And it also makes us remember the times in which they were living. It's very awkward, if not dangerous, to project where we are today onto people who lived 150 years ago and 160 years ago, and realize that the expansion of this democracy has been step by step from the very beginning. I mean, at the very beginning of the Republic, something like 6% of white males in the U.S. could vote in the election that elected George Washington as president. So it's been step by step. By the time Lincoln was elected, by the time even John Quincy Adams was elected, you were up to 60 to 80% of white males. You no longer needed to own property. As long as you paid your taxes, you could vote. And so the vote has been steadily expanded throughout our history, and it's part of the march of democracy as it has become far more inclusive.
Your career as a civil servant began in 1966. You joined the CIA. So that's in that period of time. Like, how do you assess the progress that you saw during your time in the federal government? From joining the CIA up until serving as Secretary of Defense under Presidents Bush and Obama.
I think it's been extraordinary. I mean, I joined CIA 2 years after the Civil Rights Act, or 1 year after the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And when I went to William & Mary as an undergraduate in 1961, the Commonwealth of Virginia was completely segregated. So, you know, it's been an extraordinary period of time, and there are those who would say, well, we ought to have done all of this a long time ago. Well, yeah, we should, but that's not the way societies move, and that's not the way governments move. When you move very fast, you run a very great risk of alienating a significant part of the country. And figuring out how you make change for the better and bring people along is perhaps the toughest piece of being a politician, being a political leader.
I mean, we're talking about in this film, you know, the different times in 1865, but we were in different times in 2006. What is your assessment of the vitriol in American politics now, and do you see a way out of it?
Well, I think there is a way out of it, and we've been through periods of vitriol before.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, every now and then we go through one of these periods of turmoil and domestic division and so on, and either something happens to bring us together, or it sort of burns itself out. People get exhausted and they say, let's just get on with business. Let's fix some of the problems that we have. And I think the best place for it to start is probably locally, where people are closer, elected officials are closer to the people who elected them, meet them at McDonald's or at a local place. And I think it's at the local and state level where the civility perhaps begins to reassert itself.
Secretary Gates, I can't thank you enough for inviting us up here to your beautiful home and home office in Washington. This has been really terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Gates is done for the night, but the political movies continue on TCM. Coming up, from 1992, the number 22 film on the New Republic's list of the most significant political films of all time, Denzel Washington in Spike Lee's Malcolm X is next on TCM.
Next on TCM, Malcolm X, then Primary, and later the law in her hands. TCM tips the scales tonight.